course, we gotta have disclosures. See, here's the deal. Some of us have been around a little bit longer, so we know back in the day, what was it? The exemption for estate plan for estate taxes was like 600,000. What did it mean back then, right? So it meant that if you had an estate larger than $600,000, you had to plan ahead for estate taxes, right? Because at some point you're gonna when you die, you don't worry about it, but it's your family that you leave behind that worry about having to make sure they get the estate taxes settled. And what happens when you have wealth, right? What happens when you have wealth is you lose a portion of your wealth that does not transition to your heirs if you did not have an estate plan set, right? Because what happens is they have to liquidate a portion of your assets to pay for the estate taxes that's due. How much are estate taxes today? What's the rate? 40%, right? All right? But here's the deal too. What's the exemption today? Exemption today is around 11 million per person. All right? For a married couple, it's about 22 million.
It went up.
All right? If you want to be exact, it's 11.1.
Trump.
All right? So what does that tell you today? A lot of Americans are not going to be subject to estate taxes. But then, so because we think about it that way, we don't really think about estate planning for the rest of the population that's not affected with that, right? Because I mean, today really, that kind of estate planning we used to do back in the day where we put everything in an irrevocable life insurance trust, it's not quite as existent today because we don't have to worry about it because the threshold is really high, right? If you take a look at this in 1986, the exemption was so low, right? Remember in 2010 when everything was, it's zero? So basically, it was a good time to die because you wouldn't have had to worry about paying estate taxes, right? Let me rephrase that. The heirs of the people that passed away in 2010 benefited from not having to worry about estate taxes. All right? And then it kept on going up. What happened in 2011 is ATRA was created, ATRA, right? American Taxpayer Relief Act. What does that mean? The exemption is 5.25 million and it's set for inflation. So what it means is it's going to go up over time, right? And today, from 5.25, the exemption is 11 million, right, per person. So people are like, I don't have that much of an, And right now, if you own a house here in the Bay Area, say you own 2 homes here. A lot of folks here were really smart, when before the real estate boom, they bought a lot of properties, and now these properties are worth a lot. You own 2 or 3 homes here, you're probably worth 10 million, right? But here's the deal, you're just like, I'm not subject to estate taxes today. But what does this mean to you today? And what do you have to be in the lookout for? What you have to be in the lookout for is that this has a sunset rule incorporated. What's a sunset rule? It means that it's going to revert to the 5.25 million. But when? That's the end of the administration, which is 2025. So in 2026, everything is going back to 5 million, right? So what does that mean to you? What it means to you is that you have to think forward. You can't just think about today, right? Because at some point, maybe you're not liable for estate taxes today if you die. And don't get into the mindset that, let my kids worry about it when I die, right? Because one thing that happens, acrimony. What's acrimony? Family fight over wealth. It happens all the time. More so than we think about, right? So in 2026, it's going to revert back to 5.25 million. If you're individual, you're not married, you're worth 10 million today, you don't worry about it, right? But if you can control when you die, then you don't worry about it. But if you're only 46 today, what's life expectancy say for a male? That's 46. Between 80 and 85, right? Women is between 82 and 87, right? So what does it mean? A 46-year-old has how many years till 82?
40.
36 years. Who knows about the rule of 72? At a 4% growth rate, based on your asset today, what would, say a $10 million asset today, in 16 years, at a growth of 4%, how much is your assets then in 18 years, right? Double, 20. And then you have another 18 years, right, till life expectancy, and that 20 is what? 40, right? So think about this. When you're doing estate planning, you don't think about just today. You think about the future. If you don't want to have to do the math on your own, we have a calculator for you. Go to PacificLife.com, not the agent site. The agent site doesn't have it, but on the general public website, there's PacificLife.com. Just type in calculator on the find button, and it'll give you all the different calculators that we have for the consumer. All right? Again, the moral here is don't just think about the exemptions today. Think about the future. Find the future value of it. All right? So in that example alone, there's a lot of people here in the Bay Area because they're asset wealthy with real estate. They're worth 8 to 10 million, and they're still in their mid-40s or early 50s. Put your thinking hat on and your calculator on. See the value of that, of that net worth, at life expectancy. Some carriers will only let you go up to 25, even if the clients are young. But for the most part, you got to do the math. You got to be able to do the math so you can present. Okay? So this is the exemption today. This is kind of like the history of how the exemptions kind of evolved. But reality is because of it's fairly high. It's 22 million per couple right now, right? So really, less than 1% of the population is going to need the traditional estate planning that we know from the past, which is, buying life insurance, putting it inside an ILET, an irrevocable life insurance trust. And then, what happens, right? The ILET, you basically use that later on when you pass away. There's very specific designations inside on what needs to be done. And part of it, really, the main purpose is paying for the estate taxes that's due. And why? The why is because you want to make sure you preserve your wealth, right? Because otherwise, you lose about 40% of your wealth. It goes to the government. And when you work hard for that wealth, you don't want it to go away, right? But only a few of us would have to worry about that today. But remember, in the future, when everything drops down to the ATRA numbers, it's about 5 million exemption per person. But who knows what's going to happen when the new regime takes over, right? This new, patch on this law is basically from the new administration. So you never know, right? So it's uncertain. But, we got to think about, the rest of the Americans today that are not in that bracket that need to have that kind of planning. What do we actually do? What's the day-to-day or the daily type of estate planning that we need to keep in mind, right? The planning today is still very much alive with the kind of estate planning that we need to do. Part of the whole deal with estate planning that we need to think about is not just about the wealth transfer, it's also about what happens. As I mentioned earlier, families fight over wealth, regardless of the size. People fight, and it doesn't, and you have to make sure too that the individual is not just about the family. Some people don't have any families, right? And maybe they're charitable inclined. I'm working on a case right now. This guy has a very specific charity that he loves and is very fond of it. So his charity is basically going to lose a lot of money when he passes away, right? So he actually, doing estate planning specifically to making sure he leaves something for the charitable institutions that he actually devotes his money to. So keep in mind, estate planning is not just, your traditional leaving stuff in the islet. It could be someone that really just wants to do a charitable, donation or continue that legacy. It could be any of the following concepts that we actually, want to kind of talk about today. Let's talk about estate planning for the rest of the population, right? Who here knows a family with special needs children? All of us, right? And when you think about estate planning, let's put our mindset on the typical everyday estate planning that you and I will encounter more often than the people that have so much wealth, right? One of the things that we need to make sure we think about are situations like, for example, special needs planning, right? What's the special needs planning do, right? It doesn't require a lot of wealth to do special needs planning, right? This type of estate planning is very much alive for every family that needs it, that has the situation. Special needs planning, your typical setup, you have a special needs trust that's set up for the special needs child, right? What you do is you buy a life insurance policy. The trust is the beneficiary and the owner of that. And the concern here is mom and dad are, in that position where I have a special needs child. If this special needs child outlives me and my spouse, you know what happens to a special needs child, right? So the intent with the special needs planning is having a trust that benefits from the death of the parents and making sure that there's a very specific detail that is actually executed after the death of the parent, right? And the thing about this is when it comes to special needs planning, you don't need to buy a cash accumulation product. You don't need to spend as much money on those. You can. One thing that you can do is if you're young and you have a concern, you can buy a small policy, do it death benefit increasing, and let it grow over time. But maybe a little bit later in life, when you're 50, 55, or 60, and you still have that concern, you can just buy, a protection policy. And this is actually one area where a second to die comes in really handy. A lot of parents that have that situation, they look at second to die life insurance as a viable option for this. Because they don't need a benefit when each other dies, right? The benefit is really later when they're both gone. So a second to die life insurance policy is actually very common when it comes to special needs planning, all right? But keep in mind the new product I mentioned earlier too, the protector. If you're just looking for the death benefit to transfer over to that trust upon death, for your single, moms, single dads, that do this, that new product is actually a viable option too. So there's so many different ways to wrap a life insurance policy in special needs planning. It's just about knowing the concept that, hey, I can do this. I remember Ross talked about this. Let me give him a call, okay? So that's one thing. I know the second one is everyone asks, what is that? Marital and Qualified Terminal Interest Trusts. Let's call this the Q-tip trust, all right? Either way. How many folks know families where, say, maybe the gentleman just remarried and has children from a prior marriage? It's common, right? Yeah. If there's any assets in that new marriage and the prior marriage that needs to be protected, this is one way to actually do some planning. And again, these concepts are there for you to make sure you can start a conversation. Nothing may come up from these, but at the same time, it's all about taking care of the client and knowing the questions to ask, and also figuring out the dynamics within the family, right? So the Q-tip trust is really, for those situations, say, for example, I'm 60, right? I married somebody a lot younger, 45, and I have, children from a prior marriage in their 30s, and I want to make sure I take care of my new spouse, but at the same time, also take care of the kids. In that situation, a Q-tip trust basically, if I die and I have the wealth, everything transfers to my current spouse, right? And upon death of my current spouse, everything transfers to my kids. It's layering the transfer of assets. That's called a Q-tip trust. But in some situations, when you marry somebody so much younger than you, right? It could happen. It has happened before. And sometimes the kids are the same age as the new spouse. Right. In that situation, the Q-tip trust may not benefit them because then they'll have to wait for that new spouse to die, and if they're the same age, they may never die together, So in that situation, then this is where you put your thinking hat on, think ahead, then you buy a separate life insurance policy on that example. Make sure the other kids are the beneficiaries. See, it's about, applying the life insurance in every situation, right? It's about uncovering what's needed. If you ask about the family dynamics, especially in a new marriage, it gives you the ability to kind of oversee, okay, I'm going to need this, I'm going to need this. Our purpose for doing these training sessions is not about just, teaching you about the concept. It's teaching you on how to think ahead and see where a life insurance opportunity comes up. And at the same time, if you ask the right questions, it shows the fact that you're trying to help the individual, right? Because it's not just about getting a sale, right? It's about educating that individual on things that they need to know. Perhaps nothing may come out of it today, but they'll think about this. And at some point, when they're ready, they're going to call you and say, hey, remember that thing you talked about? Yeah, I'm ready for it, right? So it's about having the conversation now. It's not about having a conversation. I can tell you so much today. I have a couple of cases where the estate planning conversation should have happened a long time ago, and they're trying to buy policy when they're 78 or 80. I have an estate planning case right now. Mom and dad are worth about 72 million. And 81 and 83, I believe. They're still in fairly good health, but I mean, there's so much stuff that you have to look at when you're at that age, right? Underwriters is not just going to give you a policy. So, I mean, if they die between now and 2025, 22 million is the exemption. So at 70 million, what's that, 48 million is going to be subject to state taxes, right? And what's 40% of 48 million? 16 million. Imagine creating all that wealth and losing 16 million to the government, right? So they're finally setting up their IRA. And you know how this case actually came about? An agent was listening at my training and actually remembered. She was having a conversation at a grocery store with someone. And said, yeah, my parents are at this age and, yada, yada, yada. It's like, oh, well, I may be able to, help you with that. And, it's the daughter that actually mentioned this to the parents. And the daughter says, do you have a state plan in place, Mom and Dad? They're like, oh, we have so much money, it's okay, you just get it. But, when she mentioned, at this rate, you might lose about 16 to 18 million. That's not even counting, anything, all the fees and everything, right? So the parents are like, oh, is that a lot to you? Like, yeah, it's like, okay, let's create a trust. So it's about having the conversation early, all right? Even if it's not going to amount to anything today, know the fact that if you introduce the concept, you stand a better chance of getting that opportunity later than someone that never mentioned it, all right? Charitable planning, we talked about that. So, not everyone has a loved one. So charitable planning, if you have clients that are very charitable inclined, make sure you introduce that concept. Business succession planning. This one, we never think about this as an estate plan, right? But it is. What is estate planning? Estate planning is just basically the art of being able to transition your wealth to your loved ones with a long-lasting effect even long after you're gone, right? So that's what estate planning is. Not just about the rich people trying to transfer money. It's for everyone. Business succession planning. Who knows business owners? I sure hope everyone does, right? When you talk to business owners, when you know business owners, especially if there's a partnership in that business ownership, one of the things you want to know is like, what's your exit strategy, right? If you and I, Marissa, own a business together, right, and we're both married, for example, I'm not, yet, but that's, so, I could, but I'm just kidding. Now, say we're both married, right, and if I die, you know what happens with community property, right? All of a sudden, you're in business with my spouse. Yeah. All right? Or if you die, all of a sudden, I'm in business with your spouse. Right? Business succession planning. It's not just business succession planning. It's estate planning. Very much alive today. You got to make sure, well, how do you transfer that business, right? This is when you start thinking about, business planning and wrapping an estate plan at the same time, right? Because what? Business succession, right? What? In this situation, when there are two owners, typical thing that you do, again, buy-sell agreement. Right? Once a buy-sell agreement, it's just, we have an agreement. Something happens to me, this is how you get the portion of my business, right? If I die prematurely, this is how you get it. Or, whatnot. It's just basically, if I die in that example, all of a sudden Marissa's in business with my spouse. And what if my spouse does not have any experience in that business? Just been more of a housewife and doesn't know anything about it? Would you want to be in business with somebody in that status? Part of the grief too is they may not be able to perform right away. So having a business succession plan in place is very important as part of your estate planning. When you have a business owner, you're sitting down with a business owner, make sure if there's a partner involved, ask them, do you have a succession plan already set up, right? And that's one of the easiest ways to actually introduce life insurance to a mix, right? So as we know today, estate planning is less than about federal taxes. But keep in mind, for you guys that have reps in Washington and Oregon, some states have state estate taxes. right? California, we're lucky. There's no state taxes. But for example, if you're in Washington, there's state taxes, and you have the federal estate taxes. What does that mean? Federal, we know the exemptions high today, right? But let's take, for example, Washington. For your agents in Washington, Washington has state taxes. Anything, your exemption is $2 million. If you have assets beyond $2 million, you're subject to estate taxes from the state. Now, if you're in Oregon, it's $1 million exemption, right? So in those states, you have to worry about estate taxes a little bit more than California. Because California, we only have to worry about the federal, right? But in those states, you have estate taxes, all right? So keep in mind that those are the things that you have to think about, and it depends on the state. I mean, who here conducts business in Washington and Oregon, right? You probably have multiple, appointments and state licenses, so you got to think about those, right? So let's just kind of talk about some of these things that, conversation starters. Part of having a discussion about, estate planning is being able to actually plan for things that you need to plan for, right? For example, paying off debts at death. It's a very important part. This is why you introduce life insurance to families, right? Second, providing for a surviving spouse. There's so many ways to provide for your surviving spouse, right? Number one, when you talk about second to die, right? You put a lot of cash accumulation in that second to die, because remember, when we talked about second to die a couple of weeks ago, what's one thing about second to die as far as cost? It's a very low cost, right? Second to die. So basically, you can overfund that policy and build cash value, just like you would build it on an individual policy. So in that situation, if you are the older spouse, your spouse survives, they have a way to tap into the cash value in that second to die, just like an individual policy. So you got to be kind of crafty in designing some of these policies. It could be an individual policy, it could be a second to die. Part of your day-to-day transaction when you're talking about estate planning is talking about these items, right? Paying off debt at death, providing for a surviving spouse, ensuring children from a prior marriage are treated fairly. Mom or dad remarries, the kids worry about, and as a parent too, you worry about, making sure that you provide for the kids from a prior marriage, right? So estate planning is not just about the wealthy, it's about planning ahead for situations like these, all right? Creating a legacy for a favorite charity, we talked about that. Paying funeral and estate administration expenses. That's where life insurance comes in really handy, right? You got so many different choices when it comes to that. We have Pacific Life, Voya, Nationwide, Transamerica, but you also have Everest, just purely for, for funeral expenses, right? This is why this is a good platform. You have so many choices. You have so many ways to actually plan ahead for these situations. Providing liquidity to pay estate or debt taxes. Again, that's state level and federal level. Equalizing inheritances between business and business heirs. Let's talk about, for example, say again, Marissa and I are married, and we have a business, right? She's not in the business, I run the business, right? And these are our 2 kids right here. Now, she's helping me with the business, but she's not involved in the business. She has her own life. She kind of lives that, right? And so, how do I, as a parent, transition the business to her, knowing that she'll take care of it, but at the same time still leave money for her as my surviving spouse, and not disinherit her, just because she's not in the business, right? So I want to spread the love. This is one of the situations where you put your life insurance hat on and say, okay, let me go ahead and find a way to transfer the business to her. I'll bonus money to her as an employee, all right? Do an executive bonus. She buys life insurance on my life, right? And she's the beneficiary. She's the beneficiary. Based on an agreement that's written, if I die, she gets the proceeds, and then she turns around based on the agreement, buys my portion of the business from my estate through Marissa, right? So Marissa ends up with the money, and then she ends up with the business, right? Now you're wondering, well, what happens to her, right? How do I satisfy the need to make sure I don't disinherit her, right? In that example, there's a separate life insurance on my life, just benefiting her. Then everyone's happy, right? In the event that maybe that third child is very young, I could have a specific clause to where she gets the money from the sale of the business, but there has to be enough money to be left for her upon her death as well. So there's so many ways to introduce life insurance in business succession planning, and also when families are involved in the business and one family member is not, right? So again, it's about learning what's possible, right? Talk about providing for a special needs child, and you know what, this is very interesting because last year I had one case like this, and this year I have 3 already. So it happens more often than not that we actually provide, and sometimes you may not need to worry about putting it in a special needs trust, right? Just do a straight up death benefit. But at the same time, putting it inside the trust, you have it all detailed to where you don't have to worry about, some of the guidelines, because for those special needs planning, there's very specific money delegation to make sure you are within compliance in the state. All right? Any questions? So those states with that are orange, those are the states that you have to worry about state taxes. Right? The blue ones, those are the states that have inheritance tax. There are a few. A lot of them are in the middle or the east. Right? But nearby here, where we're at, we don't have to worry about that in California. But again, some of you I know do business in Washington and Oregon, so in those states you have to worry about estate taxes. Like for example, Oregon, 16%. It's not quite 30, it's not 39.6. But I mean, if your assets are more than $1 million, you have to worry about paying 16%. Wow. And again, you as an individual, don't worry about it. It's your family, once you pass away, that has to figure out. Imagine you are the surviving, child, and you have to figure out which portion of my parents' estate do I liquidate to pay for those, estate taxes that's due. Number one, you're already grieving. Number two, you're trying to figure out, well, how do I do this, right? It's not a very fun situation. Again, it's about you knowing some of these concepts and being able to introduce it earlier on in life. Okay. I like this slide, so take a picture. How do you uncover opportunities? These are some questions I like to ask. I like the first one. When you talk about long-term care. It's the question, what impact will a major long-term care event have on your wealth transfer plans? It's a good question, right? Would you like to leave a legacy to your grandchildren or a charity? Right? Some of us love our grandchildren more than our children, right? Because we know sometimes we have a situation, right? We know our child or our daughter or son may not be as responsible, but we worry about our grandchildren, right? You guys know there's a specific thing you can do with that, right? You could, put everything in a trust, or you could simply insure your child with the beneficiary as your grandchildren or a trust. There's so many different ways, especially if I'm like 70 and I'm not insurable anymore, but my daughter or my son is still insurable, and I have an opportunity to make sure that, something happens to them, my grandchildren are protected. It's not just about protecting yourself and insuring yourself and doing all that stuff. It's all about planning ahead for the grandchildren as well. This is like, no family left behind, right? Isn't that our motto anyway, right? No family left behind. Are you concerned that your children may spend their entire inheritance and your grandchildren won't receive the legacy? Yeah, it's come up, right? But when you die, what is the potential for conflict with your children, right? When you have a little bit of wealth, and again, regardless of the size of wealth, there's always that problem where, daughter and son fight over it, Like my parents, there's not much wealth to transfer, but my sister and I are already, like, hey, who's going to get this thing? It's like, no, that's mine. And my parents are actually, my mom is a little bit morbid. She thinks she's gonna die soon, but she's not. She's healthy. She's like posting all these pictures on Facebook of her, possessions, and she's tagging me and my sister, and she's asking who wants this. She's only 60. I'm like, she is preparing. The other part is, who do you want your business to end up with, right? So these are some good questions. When you're sitting down with a business owner, who do you want to end up with your business? It's a good question. So again, if you haven't taken a picture, take a picture. This is really good. These are questions to ask. So let's talk about a couple of case studies. Is that cool? Okay, so this is a case study for a blended family. Say we have Rick, who's 55, and John is 42, legally married in California, because that's legal here, I guess, right, in California. Rick is the primary breadwinner. John works at a nonprofit organization. Rick has 2 kids, 2 young children, and Rick has some minor health problems. He's the older one of the couple. And current estate value is $3 million, so it means no estate taxes here, right, in California. Don't have to worry about that. Primary assets are a home in San Francisco, stocks and qualified plans, no federal estate tax problem. But what's the concern, right? Rick's concerns, providing for John at his death, right? Because he's probably going to die first-ish. And then ensuring his children are treated fairly at his death. Because, it's not John's children, it's his children, right? So how do you plan ahead for these? And, I like to have real-life examples like these because, this is stuff you encounter every day. You're sitting down with a blended family like this, how do you think ahead, right? Ensuring that he has protection against the cost of long-term care also, because that's a concern. Because he already has some minor health issues, he's 55, so he's not just concerned about wealth transfer to his kids and that his kids are treated fairly, he's also concerned about maybe some long-term care needs. Ensuring minimal overall friction between children and John. Again, it's not John's children, there could be, conflict later on. Mom from the prior marriage gets involved, it's fun. Potential planning opportunities. Q-tip trust, remember? We talked about Q-tip trusts. What does the Q-tip trust do? It leaves everything to John, the surviving spouse, but everything transfers over to the children upon John's death. In this situation, it looks really like a good setup because children are very young. Right? Life insurance policy ensures Rick's children will receive an inheritance at his death, as well as provide a potential source of funds to pay for Rick's long-term care costs, because it has a long-term care rider or a chronic illness rider inside. All right. So that was fairly easy, right? Doing a Q-tip trust or just doing a straight-up life insurance death benefit, including a long-term care rider or chronic illness rider in there to make sure that if that happens, it actually is covered as well.